Deserted ruins harboring the ghosts of past owners and the formerly enslaved, sprawling mansions where specters from the Civil War still linger, and cursed estates whose bounds hold the tortured spirits of those bewitched long ago await on this adventure through some of the most haunted plantations in the US. Let's jump right in. Hey guys, and thanks for joining me on this journey through some of the most haunted plantations in the United States. Scarred by war, greed, and the tragic lives of the beautiful souls enslaved on their grounds, it's no surprise that some of America's most impressive mansions also harbor their fair share of dark secrets and chilling ghost stories. Are you sure you're ready for this one? Our first haunt takes us to the southern border of Georgia to the Pebble Hill Plantation. The Pebble Hill Plantation, which is located within Thomas County in Georgia, is a famous historic estate turned museum that's bounds are widely renowned as one of the most haunted plantation homes in the whole of the country. Historically, Pebble Hill was first established through the 1820s under Thomas Jefferson Johnson, who constructed the first house on site, and following his death, it would be passed down to his daughter Julia Ann and her husband John H. Mitchell, who would hire English architect John Wynne to design a new mansion from which they harvested cotton, tobacco, and rice by way of slave labor. In 1896, the site would be purchased under Howard Melville Hanna, after which, in 1901, it was passed down to his daughter Kate, who transformed the expanse into a hunting estate. Unfortunately, in 1934, the main house on site would burn to the ground, and architect Abram Garfield would be hired to design a new one, which was fully completed by 1936. Following Kate's death, and in trend to its previous owners, Pebble Hill would be passed down to her daughter, Elizabeth Pansy Ireland, and subsequently, Pansy would go on to establish the Pebble Peach Foundation, after which the whole of the property was opened up to the public. In the present, Pebble Hill remains open to the public, offering a slew of educational materials, breathtaking gardens, events, and acts as a venue with ample space for near any occasion, including weddings, graduations, and more. Not surprisingly, the whole of Pebble Hill is thought to be haunted by the ghosts of both its former owners and those enslaved on site, and visitors have reported an impressive assortment of associated paranormal activity, including disembodied voices or commotions heard from empty rooms, instances of doors and windows that open and close by themselves, and tales of objects sighted moving around on their own, or even floating in midair for moments before crashing to the ground. Informal investigations of the property have yielded wild EMF fluctuations, chilling EVPs captured in audio recordings, and orbs and silhouettes that turn up in the backgrounds of photography and video, while others have told of phantom music heard drifting on the winds and of the smells of cooking food when none is present, and several spectral figures have been spied lurking in the old cemetery. Easily the most famous ghost stories associating themselves to Pebble Hill pertain to shadowy figures that have been sighted across the whole of the property, and that have been known to make the living feel unwelcomed. It's believed these manifestations are those of former enslaved individuals, forever seeking justice from the lives that were stolen from them so long ago. Okay, so our second haunt lands us a short skip to the west of New Orleans at the rather unique San Francisco Plantation. The San Francisco Plantation, which is placed out of Garyville, Louisiana, is a historic estate widely recognized as one of the most architecturally distinctive plantation houses in the American South, and also as one of its most haunted. Historically, the San Francisco Plantation was initially established as a sugarcane production site in 1827 under Edmond Bozenier Marmillion, who, in traditional plantation fashion, constructed the main house facing the nearby Mississippi River, while its slave quarters were situated next to the fields. Sometime between 1850 and 1855, the main steamboat Gothic-style house the site is so recognized for was finished, and may have included parts of an older structure, and its gardens would stretch from the main residence all the way down to the river. In 1879, the plantation was sold and would change hands a number of times, until 1909 when one Ory family purchased the plot, establishing the San Francisco Planting and Manufacturing Company from within. Following a slew of renovations and modernizations, in 1954, the site was opened up to the public, and through the 70s, it would welcome another set of renovations under a newly formed San Francisco Plantation Foundation, which actually still manages the property to this day. In 1974, the plantation was designated a National Historic Landmark, and more recently, the foundation has established a new garden behind the home, while citing slave cabins and a one-room schoolhouse that date back to its earliest days. While the plantation offered a museum up until pretty recently, sadly, in 2022, and after a total investment of $4 million, the company that ran said museum decided to wash its hands of the risky endeavor, and in the present, current owners have been quoted as unsure of its future. So while this stop is still worth a visit, touring options may be rather limited. Like pretty much every other one of the plantations on this list, the whole of the San Francisco plantation is believed to be haunted by both the spirits of the Marmelions and those poor souls that were enslaved on site, and those who have explored its bounds in the past have reported an astonishing range of happenings deemed otherworldly in nature. Phones, cameras, and other electronics brought onto the site have a habit of dying spontaneously, even on full charges. Some have told of their own personal belongings going missing from their pockets and turning up later in odd places, and a number of visitors have described being overcome with sudden bouts of vertigo that have become so intense at times, they're forced to actually leave the property, after which the sensation dissipates almost instantly. A handful of informal paranormal investigations have yielded strange EMF fluctuations, strains of EVPs captured in audio and video recordings, and odd temperature fluctuations caught on thermal grids, while others have told of being stalked by shadowy masses that linger around corners and in darkened places of the home. One final legend claims that those enslaved at the San Francisco, and out of spite towards those who wrongfully held them, practiced magic from their homelands, and that they might have laid a curse on plantation grounds, one that permanently tied the souls of their greedy lords to the property forever, and without any hope of moving on to the afterlife. As such, a slew of ghosts matching the descriptions of various Marmelions have been cited, though most often, the spirits of Edmund and his children. And by some accounts, they all bear tortured, confused, or saddened looks upon their faces, as if their burden in death has made them painfully aware of their wrongdoings in life. Number 3, which is actually only a short drive from our previous haunt, has us exploring the prominent Evergreen Plantation. The Evergreen Plantation, which is located just out of Wallace, Louisiana, is a prominent historic estate and its associated grounds that stand as one of the hundreds of plantations that once lined the Mississippi River, and its bounds throughout the years have been tied to a number of classic southern ghost stories. Oh, and on a side note, I didn't intentionally pick neighboring plantations, but as previously mentioned, these guys just really liked setting up camp along the Mississippi. Historically, in 1777, a first rendition of the Evergreen Plantation was designed and constructed under owner Christoph Heidel, who utilized classic Creole-styled architecture combined with African influences to better handle the hot and humid southern climate. Following damages to the property by a particularly extreme hurricane in 1788, in 1790, Christoph would fashion a larger two-story abode, which featured more intricate architecture, and preceding his passing in 1799, the second house would be inherited by his daughter, Magdalene Heidel Bienel, who would continue to reside on site with her 8 children. Over the years, the plantation's main crop and source of income was sugarcane, and sadly, this was grown and produced by a large enslaved African-American workforce, whose labors were exploited by generations of Bienels. And later, in 1835, Magdalene's grandson, one Pierre Clydemont Bienel, would modernize the old abode, transforming its exterior to better reflect its Americanization, while adding touches of Greek revival. Notably, a good majority of the plantation's creation would transpire before the Civil War, and as such, it actually remains one of the most complete examples of a southern plantation complex still in existence. Following emancipation, the Evergreen Plantation would lose its means by which to turn a profit off of free labor, and it would barely manage to stay in operation until approximately 1930, when the Great Depression resulted in its owners selling it off. Interestingly enough, following its sale, the bank that made purchase of the property would actually employ a new workforce legally and would continue producing sugarcane on site. Through the 1940s, the whole of the estate would welcome a massive restoration alongside a slew of modernizations, and in 1992, the whole of the weathered old house was designated a National Historic Landmark and is featured on the first 26 sites on the Louisiana African American Heritage Trail. Into the present, the evergreen remains open to the public for tours from Monday through Saturday and offers a range of exhibits and educational points of interest. And while a good bulk of its visitors are history enthusiasts or even tote ties to its past, the expanse has also become wildly popular amongst paranormal investigators and the like, and for good reason. Over its many years, the Evergreen Plantation has played host not just to the living, but to a slew of restless spirits, and both staff and visitors have reported extreme cold spots felt on otherwise hot days, instances of doors and windows opening and closing on their own, and the phantom smells of food, tobacco smoke, cologne, and perfume without source. Several investigations of the property have yielded high EMF levels, crystal clear EVPs captured in photography and video, and hits on communicative devices such as spirit boxes and Ouija boards, while others tell of being overcome by both feelings of sadness and anxiety that many attribute to the repressed emotions of enslaved individuals that once worked the estate's lands. One more prominent apparition known to appear on site is that of a gentleman in late 18th century attire that some believe is the ghost of the plantation's original owner, being Christoph Heidel, while others describe brief run-ins with entities they believe to belong to former slaves, sometimes rushing around corners within the home or working in surrounding fields for moments before fading away. And a handful of encounters detail run-ins with shadowy apparitions and strong poltergeist activity. Lastly, an assortment of reports from those who have neared the front gate, especially after dark, have told of the sounds of phantom horse hoof beats, and on particularly rainy days, prints have actually been discovered in fresh mud despite an utter absence of horses in the vicinity. And on to number 4, which takes us to one of the US's ghost capitals, being the city of Savannah, and more specifically to the Wormslow Historic Site. The Wormslow Historic Site, or Wormslow Ruins, which are located out of Savannah, Georgia, are the remains of a significant plantation and its grounds, which have since become synonymous with rampant paranormal activity. Historically, the Isle of Hope on which the plantation sits was inhabited by peoples native to the region for thousands of years past, though at the time of European exploration, it harbored the Yuki and Creek tribes. And in 1733, when colonists landed where Savannah is now placed, the island was within the domain of the Yamakra, which were actually just a detached tribe of the Creek. Unlike many other regions under similar situations, leader of these settlers, being the renowned James Oglethorpe, actually managed to maintain friendly relations with the locals and would even purchase Savannah and the lands in its vicinity amicably. In 1736, one Noble Jones would apply for a lease of 500 acres on the southern side of the isle, on which he would begin construction of a fortified home, and he would call this new abode Wormslow, which was likely derived from Wormslow Hundred in Herefordshire, which was a Welsh border town that his family hailed from. Notably, with the Spanish threat looming, Jones would participate both in an English raid along the St. Johns River in 1740 and in the Battle of Bloody Marsh in 1742. Through slave labor, Wormslow's main drivers were corn, rice, fruits, and veggies, and possibly indigo. And while the plantation itself was never truly profitable, Jones would amass fortune in the way of real estate and a land amassment of around 5,500 acres. Following the death of Noble in 1775, his estate would be passed through family hands for decades to come. During the Civil War, the Isle of Hope, and the mansion for that matter, was fortified under Confederate forces, though Wormslow would be returned to Jones' heirs following the conflict. In 1930, and following the stock market crash, then partial owner Elfrida Dorin Barrow would purchase the whole of the plantation from competing heirs, and would establish the Wormslow Foundation. In 1961, Barrow would donate most of the estate to said foundation, and in 1972, following the collapse of her foundation, the site would be acquired by the state of Georgia, before, in 1979, being open to the public with the exception of the house itself, whose ownership actually still lies in the hands of Noble Jones's great descendants. And if that wasn't the right number of greats, someone please correct me in the comments. Today, the Wormslow Historic Site remains open to the public and offers an iconic oak-lined avenue, walking trails, a museum, a slew of educational materials, and multiple replica structures and points of interest used in demonstrations. Chillingly, the whole of Wormslow grounds are rumored to hold their fair share of restless spirits, and those who have braved their bounds have reported spook lights and orbs captured in photography, disembodied whispers and footsteps that follow lone walkers, and the phantom glow of lanterns spied bobbing around after dark that always disappear when approached. While the final resting place of Noble Jones himself is still situated on site, it actually used to be surrounded by a bunch of other markers. That is, until the family had said graves reinterred at the prominent Bonaventure Cemetery, which some of you might remember I've actually covered in several videos. This reinterment, however, is believed to have left some of the spirits of those previously buried near quite restless, and some have reported encounters with misty figures in old-fashioned attire and several solid-looking manifestations that wander surrounding forests looking confused or lost, as if stuck forever searching for their original final resting places. Informal investigations of the expanse have yielded high EMF levels despite an absence of electricity, eerie EVPs captured in audio recordings, and the unnerving feelings of being watched or even of being tapped by someone or something unseen. And shadowy figures have been known to skirt the area around the living, seemingly watching their movements at a distance. Several high-profile reports tell of visitors who've come across entire scenes of ghostly buildings that aren't supposed to be standing, and from within, many have heard the sounds of voices, music, and the clinking of glasses, as if some version of the past is still alive and thriving just beyond the veil, while the ghosts of men dressed in everything from colonial-era attire up through Civil War uniforms have been spied patrolling the locale. Lastly, and rather suspiciously, a bunch of slave quarters that used to be standing on plantation grounds were curiously all destroyed through the late 20th and early 21st centuries in a seeming attempt to hide the site's dark past, and some have told of encounters with the entities of former slaves, who manifest as vengeful and angry specters, and that have been known to chase the living off the land that in death they claim as their own. Last but not least, our final hunt lands us just outside of Charleston at the ever-popular Middleton Place. Middleton Place, which is located in Dorchester County in South Carolina, is a sweeping plantation and grounds recognized for its lengthy and often dark history that, over its existence, has been associated with a range of Old Hill folklore and tales of encounters with the otherworldly. Historically, Middleton Place was first established through the 1730s under South Carolinian planter John Williams, who it's believed chose its location for its strategic view of the Ashley River, and following his passing, the expanse would become part of a dowry for his daughter, Mary Williams, who, in 1741, would marry one Henry Middleton, after which the Middleton name was applied to the estate. While the Middleton was initially utilized to grow rice by way of slave labor, in truth, and from what we can now tell, Henry intended it to be more of a country home away from home. The same year as their marriage, he would set to work on the sprawling property, constructing a 3-story brick Jacobean-style main mansion by year's end, while perfecting its grounds with the help of an English gardener named Sims. Interestingly enough, while pursuing an English-styled garden, the duo would derive their inspiration from the literary works of Desailly d'Argenville, and would establish a carriageway leading through a greensward and past 2 butterfly lakes. While the Middletons would reside on site for a time, following Mary's passing in 1761, Henry would move to Charleston proper, and would gift the plantation to his son, Arthur. In 1776, and amidst the Revolutionary War, Arthur would be selected as one of the men to sign the Declaration of Independence. And 4 years into the war, and during the siege of Charleston, sadly, Middleton Place would be ransacked, during which time, Arthur was actually captured and imprisoned until 1781. Ironically, following the war, in 1783, surrender terms that would eliminate British soldiers throughout the South were actually signed right within Middleton, and would mark one of our nation's earliest steps towards independence. As some interesting side notes, through the remainder of the 18th century, the first water buffalo to set foot in the US would be imported right to Middleton as experimental work animals. And in 1786, Arthur's son, Henry, along with French botanist André Michaux, would grow the first camellias on American soil. Following Henry's passing in 1846, the estate was inherited by his son, Williams Middleton. In 1860, Williams would sign the South Carolina Ordinance of Secession as they attempted to break free from the U.S., ultimately resulting in the attack on Fort Sumter in 1861 and in the start of the Civil War. And in 1865, the Union would capture the property, ransacking the house and eating a handful of the water buffalo, while stealing 6 others that would later turn up at the Central Park Zoo. In 1868, Williams would restore damaged parts of his ancestral home. Following his death in 1883, the site was passed to his wife Susan, and preceding damages from natural disasters, time, and the elements. In 1900, Williams's daughter Elizabeth would inherit and restore the property once more. Following Elizabeth's passing, the estate was acquired by her cousin John Julius Pringle Smith, after which he and his wife would open the gardens to the public through the 1920s, and would fully restore the mansion's grounds. More recently, in 1971, Middleton Place was added to the National Register of Historic Places. In subsequent years, it was taken over by the Middleton Foundation, with Smith's grandson Charles Duell acting as the first president, and today, the property remains open to the public, offering tours and educational materials to any with an interest, as well as lodging options through the inn at Middleton Place. But it's not all fun and games at Middleton, and over its lengthy existence, both staff and visitors to its bounds have reported a range of supernatural happenings, believed to be linked to the spirits of both the Middleton family and to those they enslaved. Across plantation grounds, many have told of disembodied voices that emanate from empty spaces or rooms, the chilling phantom sounds of children laughing, crying, and playing even when no kids are present, ghostly footsteps that stalk the living, and extreme waves of sadness, dread, and hopelessness. Several informal investigations of the expanse have yielded high EMF levels, crystal clear EVPs, orbs and strange mists that appear later in the backgrounds of photography, and extreme temperature fluctuations without cause. And several have described run-ins with ominous shadowy figures and a feeling of never truly being alone that permeates the premises. Also reported throughout Middleton are the scents of pipe smoke and old-fashioned perfume without source, instances of objects moving on their own, and inexplicable electrical malfunctions with cameras and phones. And several have even told of their vehicles stalling in the parking area, leaving them stranded near the old demesne late into the night. Lastly, an array of apparitions bearing resemblance to Middleton family members from different eras have been spied in various areas, some of which that don looks of confusion, and others that are seemingly still going about daily tasks from their lives long since spent. Thanks for joining me on this adventure through some of the US's most haunted plantations. If you enjoyed hearing my histories and ghost stories, subscribe to my channel, throw this upload a like, and share me with anyone you feel could use a good scare. I'll see you all next time.